Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, hang out with these nerds.
Nathan Nerdarch.
Nerdarchy is Ted.
Today we asked the question, does D&D deserve an Amazon?
Jump down in the description below where you can sign up for Nerdarchy, the newsletter, get weekly gaming tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So I was actually strolling and trolling through Facebook one day, and I believe it was like the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons group, that I saw someone ask an interesting question. And it was, how would you do an Amazon character class in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons? And he was like, before you go giving me a hard time about, what an Amazon character class, and just saying it's just a fighter, we do have the barbarian class. So we have the paladin class. We do have different types of classes that are very similar. So why not an Amazon character class?
Well, whenever a conversation comes up about making a character class, I ask first, can it be done with the classes we already have, the archetypes we already have, or can it fit as a new archetype under one of those classes? Because that's where I would go first. I don't feel that Amazon has the feel of it needs its own class. It could honestly be a barbarian, a ranger, or a fighter.
Yeah, considering what's available already, I'd feel hard pressed to figure out abilities and traits for
a full class.
A full class that's pretty much another type of fighter.
Now, that being said, I think it would be fun to build an archetype around it. So we have to kind of look at some examples of what we find, the Amazon, Greek mythology. Mm-hmm. It was, they basically the offspring of a wood nymph and Ares, and they were basically people dedicated to war, and they were all female. We also have, more modern pop culture. We have Wonder Woman. And what is it, Themyscira? And Themyscira, where it's all Amazons as well, and there are no men. So there's these different ideas, and there's different tropes of the idea of females that capture men and keep them subservient, and kind of that's how they propagate their, I guess, tribe or species or race, or however you want to look at it, right? So there's all these different tropes that are playing around. You have the Amazons on Mars, and really cheesy, crazy stuff as well.
Makes you think of Futurama.
Yeah. So then you have to decide well, what is important to it, and what do we throw away?
Mm-hmm. So I look at the similarities between the different cultures, and I look at Wonder Woman. I look at the Amazon from Diablo. I look at some of the stuff that we see in history, and to me, my typical takeaway is, okay, they kind of fight similar to the way they do in 300. I see the shield, I see the spear, and I see fighting in a group, fighting together, unity. I think all of these things are incredibly important to my iteration thereof.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong theme of sorority and sisterhood as well.
Yeah, so it's partial culture and then partial warlike nature.
Right. But that being said, if you look at Greek mythology and go Ares and the spawn of Ares and a wood nymph, that literally could be a race.
Yeah, and I think in mythology they are considered a race of people.
Yeah, so you could be kind of a branch of Azamar. It would be even another way to look at it. But I actually feel like doing a character class would be, well, not a character class per se, but an archetype would be a bit more fun.
Well, an archetype, you could always say the original Amazon people were this. They basically had these tenets or whatever ways of fighting, and this archetype is simply someone who adopts that. It might not necessarily be an actual race Amazon, but there's someone who follows the footsteps of that set of skills.
Right, and then there's also you were talking about, you see them kind of like Spartans in some aspects, and because they're always depicted as lightly armored, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's well, is that how they would really be, or is it because they're from hot regions and climes and armor wouldn't be as appropriate? Or is it just because men have always depicted Amazons and they'd rather see half-naked women?
Well, so all of these things need to be taken into account. So if you're going to do it and you're going to make it this way, you want to do something that pays homage to where it comes from, where it's inspired by. So if we're used to seeing Amazons not wearing a lot of armor, then I would think that that's what you would want to do. You'd want to make something that people are going to recognize, so it should be wearing little to no armor.
Right. I guess at the same time, though, you want to be sensitive to modern sensibilities, for lack of a better word, and take that into consideration with your design as well. So obviously, a fighter class that doesn't wear much armor is going to be hampered. A ranger class might work because they tend towards medium or light armor anyway. The barbarian works the best because you're going to get optimal protection with minimum armor.
Right.
And if we go with the mythological aspect of the wood nymph, that kind of makes ranger kind of like having natural powers, as well as being good at fighting, as well as not wearing a lot of armor. I wasn't thinking about it at first, but it kind of looks like it could be a ranger archetype, from my perspective.
Yeah, because there's this weird area, right, where you have this super fierce warrior, but they're also super skilled at the same time, and disciplined. And they work together really well. So like you could literally build it around kind of an archetype that maybe excels with working with others. Maybe they grant benefits and also get benefits when they have allies, in or near them. And I feel like you could kind of do that with you could do that with fighter or barbarian, but then when you go to ranger archetypes, that doesn't seem to feel right.
Well, the problem, going with, this type of thing, I see Amazons as, leaning towards dexterity, which would apply to Ranger, because they typically are light and agile in what they're doing. If they're wearing light or medium armor, they typically have a decent dex, whereas fighter pretty much leans towards dex or strength. But I don't feel that there's enough there with fighter to take it in that direction.
I think this is where we're going to have a little bit of a problem, where what's dex considered in Dungeons and Dragons, and how much dex you actually use for sword fighting in general. Because we run into that problem where you're using strength or dex in the game, but really it's like a big combination of how hard you hit and where you hit. So that's like a combo of both of those. So we're going to have an issue with kind of overlap of the concept of how agile these warriors are, with whether or not that comes from them doing acrobatics and athletics while they're using their strength to attack, in game mechanics wise.
Well, also too, I feel like if you're diagnosing it and going, well, the ranger mechanically makes sense, but if you go with the lore, then fighter makes way more sense. Because even if you're saying, well, they're derived from a wood nymph, if you look back at mythology, they don't really care about that. They're warlike people.
No, they didn't have magic powers. From what I
right,
understand.
they care about the art of war. So what if instead, what if we took another tact, right, and said, although, typically where the Amazons in mythology are from, they didn't wear a lot of armor because of the climate. But that doesn't mean they can be trained or proficient in armor. And if you just take your Amazons and put them somewhere else, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
and
they're going to wear what's appropriate towards the
right.
climate.
And you're still opens up medium armor anyway, because if you just wear a breastplate, glaives, the minimum amount of armor where you're protected, but at the same time is going to kind of like insulate you against the climate and weather. So if you're in a hot place, like even like Sparta, the Spartans, like they still wore a breastplate, they still wore bracers and glaives, and they would use that giant shield. So we could literally like kind of model it off of the Spartan warrior. But to make it more interesting, right, and to say, all right, we just don't want to make them a battle master, because that's kind of where I'm seeing it. Like I know you said champion.
Yeah, I kind of like the champion for the athletics build, for the jumping longer, faster, harder, whatever aspect of the champion, the increased crit. There's a lot of things that are attractive about the champion to say, yeah, this was a good overall warlike Amazon.
But there's nothing in either of them. I mean, well, there's some stuff in Battlemaster that gives the talk of working well with others, but there's not enough, if you ask me.
So if I was to build Amazon as a fighter archetype, then I would start looking at those abilities and how you could use them to interact with the other allies. I might even like look at previous editions, like look at the Warlord, right, from 4th edition, and go, oh well, how do they interact with each other? How do they bolster their allies? How do they get better by fighting in a group than individually? It could definitely be a different way to look at a fighter archetype.
Kind of like the applying in some way a mechanic similar to the Mastermind, the thief archetype Mastermind from the Skag.
I was also thinking along the lines of, similar to the Bardic inspiration, you can have things that, as opposed to me just kind of pep talking you up, like you're literally like shouting out tactical advantages and this to your allies of, shift left or whatever.
It almost feels like, like there's a lot of ways to Amazon in 5e like
Yeah.
by being a ranger, a barbarian, a fighter, a bard. And, maybe there is cause to actually make the Amazon character class, because there's all these different aspects that we're seeing, and you could have them, have it focused by having having archetypes that could branch out into any of these.
So let's ask you guys, what do you think? Should Nerdarchy make the Amazon class, or should Nerdarchy make the Amazon archetype? Don't you guys figure it out in the comments down below. While you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You can tweet at us over at Twitter.
You can also patronize us in a good way over on Patreon.
So until next time, stay nerdy.